Lila Hart always prided herself on her ability to juggle life's demands. Between running a small photography business and managing a home with her husband, Peter, she rarely had a moment to herself. But she loved the chaos, especially when it brought her closer to her clients and their stories. Her days were filled with weddings, family portraits, and corporate headshots, each session a glimpse into someone else's world. So when she received an inquiry from a new client, she treated it like any other. The client, a man named Evan Pierce, had requested a private session for professional portraits. His emails were polite, his request straightforward, and Lila saw no reason to question it. She scheduled the session for a Saturday morning at her studio, excited to meet another person with a story to tell. When Evan arrived, Lila was struck by his confidence. He was tall, with an air of casual charm that made him instantly likable. He shook her hand firmly and complimented the setup of her studio, making small talk as they prepared for the shoot. "So what do you do?" Lila asked as she adjusted the lighting. "I'm in real estate," Evan replied, smiling. "Photos are a big part of the business. Got to look approachable, you know?" Lila laughed, nodding as she framed her first shot. "Makes sense. First impressions are everything." The session went smoothly, and Evan was easy to work with. By the end of it, Lila felt like she had gained not just a client, but a potential new connection in the local business community. As they wrapped up, Evan lingered near the door. "Your work is amazing," he said, handing her a check. "I'll definitely recommend you to others." "Thanks," Lila replied, smiling. "I appreciate it." Evan hesitated, his expression shifting. "Actually, there's something else I wanted to ask you about. It's kind of personal." Lila raised an eyebrow, curious. "Sure. What's on your mind?" Evan glanced around, as if ensuring they were alone. Then he said, "You're married to Peter Hart, right?" The question caught Lila off guard. "Yes," she said slowly. "Why?" Evan hesitated, his confidence wavering for the first time. "I'm not sure how to say this, but I think I've seen him with someone else. Someone who isn't you." The room seemed to tilt, Lila's breath catching in her throat. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice tight. Evan ran a hand through his hair, his tone apologetic. "I didn't want to get involved, but I thought you should know. I've seen Peter a few times at a restaurant downtown. Always with the same woman." They looked close. Lila stared at him, her mind racing. "Are you sure it was Peter?" Evan nodded. "Pretty sure. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but it seemed more than friendly." Lila felt like she had been punched in the stomach. She tried to keep her expression neutral, but the weight of Evan's words pressed down on her. "Thank you for telling me," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Evan looked genuinely remorseful. "I'm sorry, Lila. I hope I'm wrong, but I thought you deserved to know." When he left, Lila locked the studio door and sat down, her hands trembling. The room felt suffocating, the air thick with questions she didn't know how to answer. Peter? Her Peter? The man she had built a life with, trusted with her heart. How could this be true? That night, Lila couldn't bring herself to confront Peter. Instead, she watched him carefully, searching for any sign of deception. He seemed normal, too normal. He kissed her cheek when he came home, asked about her day, and made dinner like he always did. But Lila couldn't shake the doubt. "I ran into someone today," she said casually over dinner. Peter looked up from his plate. "Oh, who?" "Evan Pierce." "Do you know him?" Peter frowned, shaking his head. "Doesn't ring a bell." "Why?" Lila shrugged, forcing a smile. "No reason. He's a new client. Just thought the name might sound familiar." Peter nodded, returning to his meal, but Lila's mind raced. If Evan was telling the truth, Peter was either an excellent liar or completely unbothered by the risk of being caught. That night, while Peter slept soundly beside her, Lila stared at the ceiling, her heart pounding. She needed answers, but she wasn't sure how to get them. She thought about Evan's words. They looked close. If Peter was cheating, she needed proof, something undeniable. And she wasn't going to wait for it to fall into her lap. The following morning, Lila woke with a heavy resolve. The doubts planted by Evan's words had grown into a gnawing suspicion she could no longer ignore. If Peter was hiding something, she needed to uncover the truth for her sanity, if nothing else. Peter left for work as usual, kissing her cheek before heading out the door. Lila watched him go, her stomach twisting. Once his car disappeared down the street, she sprang into action. She started with his phone. It wasn't an invasion of privacy, she told herself. It was survival. But Peter's phone was locked, and while she knew the passcode for work purposes, guilt made her hesitate. Finally, she entered the digits, her heart pounding. The screen unlocked. Lila navigated to Peter's messages, scanning the threads for anything unusual. Most were mundane, work chats, family group texts, and exchanges with her. But one thread caught her eye. It was under a contact labeled T, just an initial, with no photo or identifying details. The messages were sparse, but the tone felt off. T. Can't wait to see you tonight. Usual place? Peter. Looking forward to it. Miss you. Lila's hand shook as she read the words. She scrolled further, but found no additional messages. The rest of the thread had been deleted. She checked his call log next. The same number associated with T appeared frequently, always in the evenings or during Peter's lunch breaks. Her chest tightened. If Evan was right, this might be the person Peter had been meeting downtown. Lila spent the rest of the day in a daze, trying to piece together the fragments of her suspicions. She thought about Peter's recent behavior, replaying moments she had brushed off as insignificant. He had been working late more often, claiming deadlines and meetings. And though their relationship hadn't felt strained, there had been a growing distance, subtle but undeniable. By the time evening rolled around, Lila had made up her mind. She needed concrete proof, and she wasn't going to wait for Peter to hand it to her. When Peter came home that night, Lila kept her composure, acting as though everything was normal. "How was work?" she asked as he set his bag down. "Same as always," Peter replied, smiling. "Busy, but nothing I couldn't handle." They ate dinner together, and Lila forced herself to engage in light conversation, though her mind was elsewhere. She had installed a location tracker on Peter's phone earlier that day, using a discreet app she hoped he wouldn't notice. When Peter went to bed early, claiming exhaustion, Lila stayed up, waiting. Around 10 p.m., Peter's phone buzzed with a notification. Lila glanced at it from across the room, her stomach dropping as she saw the message preview. T. I'm here. Don't keep me waiting. Moments later, Peter emerged from the bedroom, fully dressed. Heading out? Lila asked, trying to keep her tone casual. Peter hesitated. Yeah, just a quick errand. Won't be long. Lila nodded, watching him closely. Be safe. Peter gave her a small smile before slipping out the door. As soon as he left, Lila grabbed her phone and opened the tracking app. A small dot marked Peter's location, moving steadily toward downtown. Her heart pounded as she grabbed her keys and headed to her car, determined to follow him. The drive felt surreal, her hands gripping the wheel tightly as she kept a safe distance from Peter's car. He finally pulled into the parking lot of a small restaurant, one she didn't recognize. Lila parked down the street, her breath shallow as she watched him walk inside. She waited a few minutes before following, her nerves threatening to overtake her. The restaurant was dimly lit, with cozy booths lining the walls. Lila scanned the room, her chest tightening as she spotted Peter near the back. He wasn't alone. Sitting across from him was a woman Lila didn't. Do you think emotional cheating is as bad as physical cheating? Write in the comments. Recognize. She was striking, long dark hair, impeccable makeup, and an air of confidence that made her seem out of place in the modest restaurant. Lila's breath hitched as she watched them. Peter was leaning forward, his expression animated as he spoke. The woman laughed softly, her hand resting on his arm. It was intimate, too intimate. Lila snapped a few photos on her phone, her hands trembling. She couldn't confront him here, not in public. Instead, she slipped out of the restaurant and drove home, her mind racing. When Peter returned an hour later, Lila was waiting for him in the living room. "How was your errand?" she asked, her tone sharp. Peter froze, his expression shifting to confusion. "Fine." "Why?" Lila stood, her phone in hand. "I know where you were, Peter. I followed you." His face went pale, and he took a step back. "Lila, I can explain. Don't lie to me," she snapped, her voice trembling. "Who is she? And don't give me some story about a client or a coworker. I saw you with her." Peter's jaw tightened, his eyes filled with guilt. "It's not what you think," he said weakly. "Then what is it?" Lila demanded, her anger boiling over. "Because from where I was standing, it looked like you were on a date with someone who isn't your wife." Peter's face paled as he opened his mouth, but no words came out. The silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. "Say something," Lila demanded, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and heartbreak. "Tell me the truth." Peter ran a hand through his hair, his shoulders slumping. "Her name is Tara," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "Tara," Lila repeated, her heart sinking. "And who is she, Peter? Your coworker? A friend?" Peter hesitated, his gaze dropping to the floor. "She's someone I met a few months ago. We started talking at a work event, and it got out of hand." "Out of hand?" Lila snapped, her voice rising. "You mean you started sneaking around with her? Lying to me? Meeting her late at night while pretending nothing was wrong?" Peter flinched, his guilt etched across his face. "It wasn't supposed to happen," he said, his voice cracking. "It started as just conversations, nothing more." But then what?" Lila interrupted, her anger boiling over. "You decided you liked her better? That I wasn't enough for you?" "No," Peter said quickly, his eyes pleading. "It wasn't about that. I love you, Lila. I never stopped loving you." Lila laughed bitterly, tears streaming down her face. "You don't do this to someone you love, Peter. You don't lie, cheat, and betray them." Peter sank into a chair, his hands trembling. "I know," he whispered. "I know I screwed up. I made the worst mistake of my life." "How long?" Lila demanded, her voice cold. Peter hesitated, his face crumpling. "A few months." "A few months?" Lila repeated, her stomach churning. "You've been lying to me for months, Peter. Coming home, acting like everything was fine, while you were, what? Falling in love with her?" "No," Peter said firmly. "It wasn't love. It was a distraction. I let myself get caught up in something I should have walked away from. And I ended it, Lila. I swear it's over." "Over?" Lila scoffed. "You were with her tonight, Peter. Does that sound over to you?" Peter's face twisted with regret. "She reached out," he admitted. "She wanted to meet one last time to talk. I should have said no, but I was weak. Lila stared at him, her chest tight with a mix of anger and despair. Do you even hear yourself? She asked, her voice trembling. You're not the victim here, Peter. You're the one who destroyed our marriage. Peter's eyes filled with tears as he stood, stepping closer to her. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, he said softly, but I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. I'll go to therapy, counseling, whatever you want. Just give me a chance, Lila. Please. Lila took a step back, her heart aching. Why should I believe anything you say? She asked, her voice breaking. You've lied to me for months, Peter. You made me feel like I was crazy for even suspecting something was wrong. How am I supposed to trust you again? Peter's tears spilled over as he dropped to his knees. Because I love you, he said, his voice raw with emotion. I made a terrible mistake, but I love you, Lila. You're my world, and I'll spend the rest of my life proving it to you if you let me. Lila stared at him, her mind swirling with emotions. She wanted to scream at him, to throw him out of the house and slam the door behind him. But she also wanted answers, clarity, and a chance to process the enormity of what he had done. Get out, she said finally, her voice trembling. Peter looked up at her, his eyes wide with desperation. Lila, get out, she repeated, her tone harder. I can't even look at you right now. Go stay somewhere else. I need time to think. Peter hesitated, his face crumpling with anguish. I'll go, he said softly. But please, Lila, don't give up on us. That night, Lila sat alone in the house, the silence deafening. She replayed Peter's confession over and over in her mind, each word cutting deeper than the last. She didn't sleep. Instead, she scrolled through the photos she had taken at the restaurant, the messages she had saved, and the memories of their life together before the betrayal. Was this something they could come back from? Or had Peter's actions irreparably broken their bond? The days following Peter's departure were a blur of emotions for Lila. She stayed in the house, the quiet pressing down on her like a weight she couldn't lift. Everywhere she turned, she saw reminders of their life together, photos from vacations, gifts exchanged on anniversaries, even the scent of his cologne lingering in the bedroom. She oscillated between rage and sorrow, between wanting to cut him out of her life completely and yearning for the stability they had once shared. The betrayal was undeniable, but so was the love that had defined their relationship for years. Peter, true to his word, stayed away. He texted her daily, his messages filled with apologies and promises to make things right. I'm giving you the space you need, but please know I'm here whenever you're ready to talk. I love you, Lila. Lila left the messages unanswered, unsure of how to respond. What was there to say? His words couldn't undo the damage he had caused, and his promises felt hollow in the face of his actions. On the third day, Lila decided she couldn't stay cooped up in the house any longer. She called her friend Amelia, someone she trusted implicitly, and asked to meet for coffee. When Lila arrived at the cafe, Amelia hugged her tightly, her concern evident. You don't have to tell me everything if you're not ready, Amelia said gently, but I'm here for whatever you need. Lila took a deep breath, her hands trembling as she recounted the events of the past week. She told Amelia about Evan's revelation, the messages she found, and Peter's confession. I don't know what to do, Lila admitted, tears brimming in her eyes. Part of me wants to walk away, but part of me, I don't know. I can't just erase everything we built. Amelia nodded, her expression sympathetic. You don't have to decide right now, she said. This is your life, Lila, and whatever choice you make has to be the one you can live with. Later that evening, Lila found herself scrolling through old photos of her and Peter on her phone. There were so many happy moments, So many memories of a time when their love had felt unshakable. She thought about the promises they had made to each other, the life they had built together. Could those memories outweigh the pain of his betrayal? Could she ever look at him without seeing the lies, the night spent with someone else? The question circled endlessly, leaving her drained and uncertain. The next morning, Lila decided she needed clarity. She called Peter and asked him to come over. When he arrived, he looked worn, his face pale, and his eyes red from lack of sleep. He stood in the doorway, hesitant, as if afraid she might change her mind. "Come in," Lila said, her voice neutral. Peter stepped inside, his movements careful, like he was walking on broken glass. He followed her into the living room, sitting across from her on the couch. "Thank you for letting me come," Peter said softly. "I need answers," Lila replied, her tone firm. "And I need you to be honest with me this time. No excuses, no half-truths." Peter nodded, his hands clasped tightly together. "You have my word." For the next hour, Lila asked every question that had been haunting her. She wanted to know everything. When it started, how often they met, what he felt for Tara, and why he had betrayed her trust. Peter answered each question with as much honesty as he could muster. He admitted to feeling disconnected in their marriage, though he insisted it had nothing to do with Lila. "It was my own insecurity," he said. "I felt like I wasn't good enough, like I was failing you. And instead of talking to you about it, I made the worst mistake of my life." Lila's anger flared at his words. "You think cheating on me was a solution to feeling insecure?" she snapped. "You didn't just hurt me, Peter. You destroyed everything we built together." "I know," Peter said, his voice breaking. "And I hate myself for it. I hate what I did to us. But I love you, Lila. I've always loved you." The conversation left Lila emotionally drained. She could see the remorse in Peter's eyes, hear the desperation in his voice. But it wasn't enough to erase the pain. "Do you even understand what you've done to me?" she asked quietly, her voice trembling. "Every time I look at you, I see the lies, the betrayal." "How am I supposed to move past that?" "I don't expect you to move past it," Peter replied. "I know it's going to take time, maybe years, to rebuild your trust. But I'm willing to do whatever it takes, Lila. Therapy, counseling, anything. Just tell me what you need." When Peter left, Lila sat alone in the living room, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. She wanted to believe that their marriage could be salvaged, that Peter's remorse was genuine. How much trust is too much to lose in a relationship after betrayal? Write in the comments. But she also wondered if the damage was too great, the betrayal too deep to overcome. That night, as she lay in bed, she stared at the ceiling, her heart heavy with indecision. Could she forgive him? Did she even want to try? Lila spent the next few days in a state of quiet reflection, sorting through the pieces of her shattered marriage. She thought about Peter's confession, his tears, and his promises to change. She thought about Tara, the faceless woman who had upended her world, and the moments Peter had stolen to be with her. But most of all, she thought about herself. The woman she had been before discovering Peter's betrayal, the woman she had become in its aftermath, and the woman she wanted to be moving forward. When Peter called to check in, his voice hesitant and filled with hope, Lila told him to come over. When he arrived, his shoulders were slumped, his face lined with exhaustion. He looked as if he had aged years in just a few weeks. "Thank you for seeing me," he said softly, stepping into the living room. "Sit down," Lila said, her tone measured. Peter obeyed, sitting on the edge of the couch, his hands clasped tightly together. He looked at her with a mix of fear and longing, waiting for her to speak. "I've thought a lot about what you said," Lila began, her voice steady. "And about everything that's happened." Peter nodded, his throat working as he swallowed. And? And I've realized that I can't forgive you, Lila said, her words sharp and precise. Peter's face fell, his shoulders sagging. Lila, please, let me finish, she interrupted, holding up a hand. I can't forgive you right now, Peter. I can't pretend that what you did didn't hurt me, didn't destroy the trust we built over the years. But Peter's head lifted slightly, his eyes searching hers. But I'm willing to try, Lila continued, her voice trembling. I'm willing to see if we can rebuild. But this is your last chance, Peter. If you lie to me again, if you ever betray me like this, we're done. No second chances. Peter nodded quickly, tears spilling over as he leaned forward. Thank you, he said, his voice breaking. Thank you for giving me a chance. I won't let you down, Lila. I swear. There are conditions, Lila said firmly. Non-negotiable ones. Anything, Peter said without hesitation. First, Lila began, you're cutting all ties with Tara. No messages, no calls, nothing. I don't care if she reaches out to you, you ignore her. Do you understand? Peter nodded. I already blocked her number. I'll do whatever it takes. Second, Lila continued, we're going to counseling, together and separately. You need to figure out why you did this, and I need help processing it. This isn't something we can fix on our own. I'll set it up tomorrow, Peter promised. And finally, Lila said, her voice hardening, you're going to earn back my trust. That means complete transparency, no secrets, no hiding. I want to know where you are, who you're with, and what you're doing. If that sounds like too much, tell me now. It doesn't, Peter said quickly. You can have access to my phone, my emails, everything. I'll do whatever it takes, Lila. Just tell me what you need. For the first time in weeks, Lila felt a glimmer of hope. It wasn't much, but it was enough to hold on to. She knew the road ahead would be long and difficult, filled with setbacks and doubt. But she also knew she wasn't ready to give up on their marriage. Not yet. Thank you, Peter said again, his voice filled with emotion. I won't let you regret this, Lila. I promise. Over the next few weeks, Peter made good on his promises. He scheduled counseling sessions, attended each one without complaint, and cut all ties with Tara. He was transparent about his whereabouts, sharing his schedule and updating Lila throughout the day. The counseling sessions were emotional and intense, forcing both of them to confront the cracks in their relationship. Peter admitted to feeling unfulfilled in his career and struggling with self-worth, though he emphasized that his actions were inexcusable. I should have come to you, he said during one session, his voice trembling. I should have talked to you about how I was feeling instead of turning to someone else. I'll regret that mistake for the rest of my life. Lila, for her part, struggled with moments of doubt. There were nights when she lay awake, replaying the betrayal in her mind, wondering if she had made the right decision. But there were also moments of progress, shared laughter, quiet conversations, and glimpses of the man she had fallen in love with. The wounds were still fresh, but slowly they began to heal. Months later, Lila found herself sitting on the porch with Peter, watching the sunset. He reached for her hand, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she didn't hesitate. Do you think we'll ever be okay again? She asked softly. Peter looked at her, his eyes filled with emotion. I think we're getting there, he said. One day at a time. Lila nodded, her chest tightening. It wasn't the happily ever after she had once imagined, but it was a start, a chance to rebuild step by step. For now, that was enough.